What is up? You have found I Like the Blazers. I am your host, Brandon Goldner, here bringing a quick video just because, look, it's the middle of summer. We're getting to NBA Finals. The Blazers are not playing anymore. It's the Miami Heat, Los Angeles Lakers Finals we all expected coming straight out of Orlando. But yeah, I mean, the Blazers are not playing anymore, right? They were eliminated. And so, you know, what else are we going to talk about? But I have seen a lot of Terry Stotts slander on the timeline. Actually, for the last couple of years or so, it's gotten a little bit more pronounced that there are a lot of people who really do like Terry Stotts, think he's a great coach, you know, this, that, and the other. I happen to be a Terry Stotts supporter. And then there are some people who really don't like him, who don't think he's a very good X's and O's coach, not a very good strategist, and who want to see Terry Stotts fired. And then, of course, there are people who land in the middle. But, you know, lately, people who don't care for him, I've seen a lot more really strong pushback against the notion that he's a good coach. I've seen a lot of people really make a strong argument that he's a really bad coach, and if not for Terry Stotts, the Blazers would be in a better place. Okay, and that's what I just wanted to bring a quick video about, because again, like, what else do we have to do? And it's been the last couple of weeks since the Blazers were eliminated in the first round, you know, went down 4-1 to the Lakers. There has been, I think every season you get a little bit of, like, you know, is the GM, you know, Olshey, he's doing a good job, terrible job, Stotts, a good job, terrible job. And so lately the Terry Stotts slander has been at 100%. And I just wanted to lob a couple things out there just for consideration. So having seen all this slander, and I just won't let that stand because Terry Stotts is my guy, right? Like, I'm a big Terry Stotts stan, and he should never be fired. You know, I threw out a poll a couple hours ago that just asked people, does Miami have a better roster than Portland? You know, Miami Heat are in the finals now. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Goran Dragic, and then they have, you know, a host of role players, right? And most people responded, and look, I have a Blazers-centered audience, so this is not a scientific poll by any means. You know, most people thought that Miami has a better roster than Portland. I then, just a little bit ago, I threw something out there because I was getting some folks in my mentions. That's what Twitter is for. And I asked, okay, let's look at it this way. If Erik Spoelstra, who's the coach of the Miami Heat, if Erik Spoelstra had been the Blazers coach since 2012, if they had the exact same roster, how many finals appearances would the Blazers have? I think it's important. Like, there are lots of different ways to think about basketball and analyze basketball. And I think one important way to do that is to look and consider hypotheticals, the if then, and to think about it that way can be really helpful to conceptualize especially when you're doing things like player rankings. It's really important to think about, you know, what would they be like if they fit, and how do you compare one player to another? So it's just really easy to ask the question, like, look, like, how many finals appearances would the Blazers have if they had a different coach, specifically Erik Spoelstra? And here's what I want to say. And this poll has not run long enough to get a huge response. Well, you know, 70 votes. Okay, fine. So here we go. Okay, I said Erik Spoelstra being the coach of the Blazers since 2012. That's when Dame was drafted, considering the same rosters. How many finals appearances would they have with Erik Spoelstra? 62% of people say 0. About a quarter of people who responded said they'd have 1 finals appearance. And then a handful of people said either 2 or 3 or more finals appearances. So most people, 60% saying they wouldn't have any. Here's what I have to say about the whole, you know, Terry Stotts is unequivocally a bad coach. That's wrong. It's not true. Terry Stotts is a really good coach in a lot of different ways, and there are some ways in which he's not a good coach at all, right? On the whole, he is a good coach, and if you look at this Blazers roster, you look at the amount of talent that they've had since Damian Lillard joined the team since 2012, he's had one player who's been an all-star. It's LaMarcus Aldridge, right? He's been gone for 5 years. Then they've had an assortment of different people. I think it's the year the Blazers really had a shot, right, is when Wes Matthews went down, blew his Achilles out, and that was, you know, the Robin Lopez, LaMarcus Aldridge, Wes Matthews, Batum, Lillard. Like, that team at that time and place, before the Warriors had really gotten entrenched, they really had a shot. I mean, they were one of the best, maybe the best team in the NBA at that point when Wes Matthews went down. We know what happened after that. The team blew up. Okay, fine. So even if you look at that team, like that team was not necessarily built for the era of basketball which came after that, right? In some ways it was. I think with Batum, with Matthews, you had players who at their best were engaged and played defense and could shoot. You know, LaMarcus Aldridge never really had a three-pointer. Maybe his last year in Portland he shot a little bit more. And you know, Robin Lopez, he's a different shooter now in Milwaukee than he used to be. Robin Lopez is actually shooting threes now in 2020, which is not something we would have thought in 2014. My point is this. I don't think there's any universe in which any coach in the NBA today could take any of those rosters to the finals, except for maybe that one team, given what the West looked like, and without Wesley Matthews getting injured. But you know what? I don't think we needed a coach other than Stotts to do that. And it's super, super frustrating when people... they present their opinions about basketball, and Lord knows sometimes I do this and I hate it myself, but when people present their opinions about basketball as being the only truth, there are lots of different ways to look at basketball. And yeah, looking really closely at how players, you know, what schemes they're put into, how they fit together, if they're put in a position to succeed or not, what adjustments the coach are making at a given time, rotations, how timeouts are being used. All of those things are super, super duper important. They really are. The X's and O's of coaching, it's the most important part of coaching, except for one other part, which is this is a team full of players who at some point in their lives were probably the best player on their team. And for whatever you want to say about these, you know, young men now as adults, as they were children and young adults growing up, a lot of their formative years and a lot of the muscle memory they developed as basketball players were as the best player. You also have an era of basketball which rightfully is giving more power to players. They're making more money. They have a slightly larger proportionate share of revenue coming in than they have in, you know, collective bargaining agreements past, or if you compare it to other major sports. All of this is just to say you have a lot of players who need to think highly of their own skills in order to survive a really super long season. What am I trying? I'm saying this in a really roundabout way, but what I'm trying to say is that part of a coach's job is to keep a team together. That's what Terry Stotts does. He has proven it for years. He has proven it since 2012 with multiple major rebuilds, having to reshuffle the deck over and over again. I honestly don't know. I think part of this conversation could be how much of a voice does Terry Stotts have in Neil Olshey's office when he's making personnel moves. We don't know that, but I think that it's pretty safe to say that Terry Stotts has less influence in those kinds of decisions than, say, a Doc Rivers did in Los Angeles, recently fired by the Clippers. Less influence in those kinds of decisions than, you know, a Greg Popovich does, that an Eric Spoelstra probably does with Pat Riley in Miami, right? Like, it seems like the delineation between coach and general manager or president of basketball operations in Portland is a little bit cleaner than it is in other places. I think that's appropriate and fine. I think there are different ways to do it. But my point being is that when you think about a coach as somebody who brings together that organizational continuity from the owner to the GM to your best player to the rest of your team, there are very, very few coaches that do that piece of coaching as well as Terry Stotts. Point blank, period. That is why he's a good coach. And aside from that demonstrable skill that he's shown for years, Damian Lillard is the Blazers' best player, and Damian Lillard likes Terry Stotts. Now, I don't think that should be the end-all be-all. I really don't. There are definitely times when players' preferences about coaches or other players has been a really bad thing. I don't deny that at all. That's totally true. I also think in a market like Portland, and something that Neil Olshey has claimed, that Portland being in a smaller market makes it much more difficult to get free agents. You know, some people say that's him covering his ass, and some people say, look, that's just the truth of the matter. To have a small market team with a player as good as Damian Lillard, who, you know, was second team All-NBA this year, has been first team All-NBA, was, you know, in the single-digit ranking of MVP voting this year, is arguably a top 5 player in the NBA, all things considered. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that not only do you have a coach who's proven that he can take teams with a lot of odd pieces, he's built top 10 defenses. Not only that, but also your best player likes him. That's a good coach. It doesn't mean he's the best coach, doesn't mean he is the best possible coach you could have. But then part of this is, in the NBA, there's a limited coaching talent pool for people who have already had jobs in the past, whose records you can evaluate. And then if you are going to be looking at a coach who doesn't have NBA experience, that can be very tricky. It can work out sometimes, but it can also be very tricky. I do think this question about Terry Stotts is particularly prescient now, and I think it's important to talk about and give some space to, because there are so many interesting and different coaches available. You have people who've been assistant coaches for a long time. Ime Udoka comes to mind. Becky Hammond comes to mind. And then you also have coaches who have a track record. Mike D'Antoni comes to mind. Doc Rivers. Brett Brown, no. But like, my point is that, like, especially with this bubble and this pandemic and teams' revenues are doing weird things, there's probably going to be even more coaching movement. And I don't think it's the worst time in the world to consider whether or not Terry Stotts is the right coach for this team right now. I don't mind that, you know, what I'm trying to say is I really like Terry Stotts. I wouldn't mind if the Blazers decided to move on from him. I wouldn't mind that. It would personally make me sad, but if the decision making that went behind that were sound and they got a really good coach, that would be fine. What I don't like to see are people who pretend as though their opinion on this matter is the definitive opinion. If you don't agree with them, then you're wrong and stupid and dumb. I don't have any time for that, and I don't think anyone else should either, because there are definitely reasons to disagree about a lot of subjective things, particularly in sports and basketball, where none of this is a perfect science. And as far along as analytics have come and looking at advanced stats, finding ways to quantify that essence that, you know, back in the day used to just be that grit and that grind, that thing that you couldn't really put your finger on it. Well, now we can put our finger on it. There are ways of measuring things that we could not measure in the past. And the things that we can measure, we can analyze them differently than we've been able to do in the past. And that does give us insight, and it gives us ways of evaluating that we just didn't used to have. And those things are really, really important. We need to keep pushing on that. As important as all of that is, it's also important to recognize that at the end of the day, a coach's job is multi-layered and multifaceted, and part of their job, and I would argue the most important part of their job, is that they manage human beings, and not just human beings, but people who are one of the 300 best in the world at what they do, that at some point in their life, again, they were the best player on their team, probably for a long time. Managing all of that, balancing all of that with the players, with your best player, with your GM, with your owner, that's not an easy job. And there are a couple coaches who are demonstrably, you know, totally excelling at that and very, very good. And Terry Stotts is one of those people. It doesn't mean he's the best coach, but he is a good coach. That is my opinion. I want to know what you think. That was a long rant. What do you think? Hit me up at I Like the Blazers on Twitter. You can email at iliktheblazers@gmail.com. Also, we have a Facebook page. You just search I Like the Blazers, or hit me up on my personal Twitter. It's Goldner PDX. But yeah, that's about it. Terry Stotts, good coach, bad coach. Do you want him here? Do you not want him here? Here's the important thing that when you think about this, if you don't like Terry Stotts, like, who would you have who's available who would replace him? Would be interested in hearing that. Let me know. Hope you all are doing well. And yeah, stay safe out there, and happy September. All right, bye.